Kintsugi Heroes brings you the following River Murray flood recovery story, jointly funded by the Commonwealth and South Australian governments under the Disaster Recovery Funding Arrangements. To find out more about this podcast, head to kintsugiheroes.com.au. The 2022 River Murray floods in South Australia were caused by record water inflows from the Murray-Darling Basin due to heavy upstream rainfall. The slowly rising floodwaters inundated homes, businesses and farmland, causing widespread displacement, infrastructure damage and agricultural losses. The disaster significantly impacted local economies, communities and led to the region's long-term recovery. In this special limited series of Kintsugi Heroes, John Millam sits down with members of the Riverlands community and gives them space to share their experiences of their personal adversity and community resilience. It's only through connection and empathy that there can be a path to recovery. In this episode of River Murray Recovery Stories, John Millam is joined by Shelley Rose, who was the Wellbeing Officer for the vast area from the Riverland to Murray Bridge in South Australia during the 2022 floods. She played a pivotal role in supporting her community through the aftermath of the Riverland flood. A retired financial counsellor and mental health practitioner, Shelley combined her skills and deep connection to the area she's called home for 23 years to aid those affected by the disaster. From delivering essential supplies to providing mental health support, she was on the ground every day. Join us as Shelley shares her journey and the profound impact of her work on the lives of those still recovering.
So welcome to Kintsugi Heroes listeners to a special series that we're running on the Riverland flood project. So this is a Beyond the Deluge episode, and today we are very, very privileged to have somebody who is intensely involved in the process of supporting people who have been through, who have their flood stories and have are living with the consequences of their experiences today. And of course, as a local, she has her own story as well. So today we welcome to Kintsugi Heroes Beyond the Deluge, Shelley Rose. Welcome, Shelley.
Thank you for having me.
We are very pleased to have you. And of course, you're a Wellbeing Officer, which is a beautiful title. I wish we could all have that title. You're a Wellbeing Officer for the community, the Riverland community, and focusing on supporting people, particularly post-flood. And obviously, you're a mental health practitioner, a retired financial counsellor, and you're performing this role in concert with other organisations, the health department, and funded by the government. What does a wellbeing officer think when they're faced with the overwhelming landscape of a post-natural disaster?
OG is probably the first thing we thought. And, there was 440 kilometres of affected area in the area that I did. So I did basically from the Riverland to Murray Bridge. So that's the Murraylands. Yeah. So it's quite a huge area that I concentrated on. There were so many people that were affected in different ways, people who didn't want to accept what had happened. A lot of them were primary residents, and some of them, this was their secondary home. Some that had been in the generations, in their life for generations and generations. So it might have been grandma's original house or something like that. And then we have the different cohort of people who have been living in this property but have had to move back to the city because they're ageing and things like that. And we don't have generally the services in those areas that they would be needing in Adelaide. So, yeah, we had a lot of different factors in a different community environment that we needed to address.
Yeah, wow. A huge job. So you went OG. Yes. And then, then sort of just, did you start around, you take one step down the street, you start to see the issues pop up? Is that how you just went, I better go for a walk and find out what's going on?
Yeah, well, pretty much we just jumped in the four-wheel drive because obviously most of the roads had had very little access, obviously still, and getting out to people's properties was originally we had a normal car until we nearly got bogged one day, and I was like, I think we need a full drive, so we got a full drive, and then it was basically just going out to people's properties and actually asking them what they needed. And connecting them with those services. So they may have needed generators to start running pumps because most people pump generally directly from the river, so they had no water at their property. So once the river receded, as crazy as it sounds that we just had a flood, they actually had no water.
Yeah, no.
And so it may just be that they needed that. They may need connecting with legal services because they were having issues with their insurance companies, and we worked quite closely with the Legal Services Commission. And then, there was different federal grants and different government grants that we had access to that we could give information on, and then all the mental health services as well, because as the cleanup happened and the toll of the mental health really affected people and that continued on, that became apparent that people are now, 2 years post-flood, we're seeing that impact is becoming the most. Most people actually are in their homes still and they haven't been able to rebuild, but it's the mental health toll that people are saying that is starting to affect them the most.
Yeah, well, it's I think from our conversations over a number of places, right, that 2 year mark is a real milestone, right, because in many ways it still separates those who have managed to cope or access resources and those who haven't.
Yeah, absolutely. So the majority, so obviously we're in a housing crisis here in South Australia as well. So being able to find a rental property while your house is being fixed has been near impossible. And then, so most people have been living in caravans on their properties, and cold winters and hot summers in a caravan with little other services and, flood affected soil and things like that is pretty tough. Yeah.
It's quite a tale. And of course, a flood is one of those terrible natural phenomena that is a great leveler, right? It ruins everything you have, whether it's rich, high end or low end, or whether when it comes in, everything smells and grows mold, regardless of what design or label it has. Right?
Absolutely. And the silt, I think that the thousands and thousands of tons of silt that is dumped on the land, it just suffocates everything. And I have talked to a fair few people who work in disaster management, and they've done obviously floods and fires, and they always say that the ground and the earth always repairs better with a flood, gives it with a fire. It gives it new life, whereas a flood just sort of destroys everything. And it's very hard to get all the nutrients and the oxygen back in the soil. So for anything to come back.
It's a complex issue you're dealing with. Of course, you mentioned what people need. In many cases, it's people who have the least who are most impacted by these kind of activities. How do you support people who already have disadvantage, and then this kind of natural trauma lands on them? What's the impact of that?
I think, the majority of people that live on the river are pensioners, and, they don't have a lot of savings as well. And so for them, and a lot of them were underinsured or not insured at all. So they thought that they had flood insurance and may have been paying their insurance for 40, 50 years, thinking that they had flood insurance, but then found out that they didn't. So for them, having a demolition or needing a demolition at the end of it was just something that they couldn't comprehend or take on. So I think that has been really tough. But, we have done some work with Sophie Thompson. So a lot of people said to me as I was going around, those who were insured said our house is insured. You know, eventually one day we'll get another one. But the one thing that really concerned them was their gardens and the natural landscape around them, because obviously they live in the river because they love that natural landscape. And, you know, one gentleman had lost his wife a few years previous, and she had planted all these roses. And that was the one thing that he had left of her, was the roses. And so he said, how do we regenerate that? And I started talking to Sophie Thompson from Gardening Australia, and she organised some donations, and we got like $12,000 worth of rose bushes and, you know, all these nutrients from Nutrog and things like that, for people to start putting all of that stuff back into the soil and regenerating the soil and regenerating their garden and giving everyone a little bit of hope and a little bit of positive stuff. So, yeah, we did that, which was fantastic, and a lot of those people really appreciated just the small token things. And then we connected with Taubman's Australia, and they donated, I don't even want to know how much paint it was because it was a lot, and I carried most of it around. And then we painted people's houses as well. So those who were underinsured or non-insured, we painted the houses with mould treatments and things like that to get people back into their homes if they were flood affected and they were good enough to go back in there, like if they were engineered safely. So every single person has needed something slightly different, and we've just adapted to whatever the need was and gone down that path. So definitely community driven for sure.
It's interesting you say we've just adapted. What made it possible for you? You know, obviously you're a local, so you have an understanding. You speak the same language, but which is often very important, right? Like to walk in and knock on the door as a local rather than a blow-in. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what made what in your past? How did you get to a place where you're so capable of supporting so many different needs? What's your story?
Well, previously I'm a financial counsellor, so I obviously have that financial background, and a lot of financial counselling is assisting people who have not very much money. So people get mixed up with a financial counsellor with a financial advisor, which we're very, very different. One is for people who have money and one is for people who don't have any money. And connecting people with services, and being able to connect through legal avenues and things like that, and knowing your rights is very much what a financial counsellor does. And so that definitely helped me. And obviously being a mental health practitioner and counsellor, that's helped me a little bit as well with this role. So, So I think, my skill set, I've lived in this area for a really long time, I think I counted it the other day, it was 23 years I've lived in this area. And like my children have all grown up here as well. They're all adults now. So I have a good connection to the land and the people as well.
That it makes it makes you perfect for this role, but it also makes you somebody who is watching, a natural disaster happen in their home, right, and in their place. So what was it like for you? Tell us your flood experience.
For me, it was hard for me to see my neighbours and my community going through such a tough time. But also I found it beneficial because I actually could help my community. And I, with the support of the Wellbeing SA and the Department of Premier and Cabinet, who funded my position so that I could assist the community and, helped me out with community development grants and things like that. I think it highlighted the work that we were doing and, the impact. And Mid-Murray Council hosted me the whole time. And I have to say the support from Mid-Murray Council was amazing as well. And, I probably couldn't have done my job as well as I could without having the support of the councils around as well. So with Mid-Murray Council, Berry Barmera and Paringa Loxton were fantastic, and Murray Bridge as well. without lots of services supporting and being able to help me in whatever way. And then obviously Sophie Thompson and, everyone else who donated along the way just really made a huge difference.
So this flood is kind of unique in that it's like the slowest, surprise you can imagine. It sort of creeps down and then comes down, and hits at the top of the flow and then works its way down the river, down to Murray Bridge. What was that like, watching, speculating that, was it increased in anxiety? Was there, a sense of delusion? What was going on?
I think at the beginning, community definitely didn't think it was ever going to get that high. And I think they were always like, in denial. But I definitely was concerned the whole way, and especially when we started building the levees and things like that and starting to protect the infrastructure. But I think some of the hardest hit areas, sort of like Blanchetown area, where the lock comes together and that water flowed over the top of that quite quickly, and then the river goes thinner there. And so there was a huge body of water that went over the top there, and then went into a thin part of the river, which really flooded that Blanchetown area quite heavily. That area very much, the majority of that whole area most of the houses in that area were up to the second story. So, wow. And in Paisley, which is just across the river from Blanchetown, a lot of those houses were underwater for 86 days to the roof.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And some people were still living in them.
Yeah, wow.
After that. Yeah.
I have a lived experience of flooding when I was a kid. I lived in up on the Castlereagh on the Namoi, and that would periodically flood. And it was weird because you would watch it. It was not the rain was weeks ago, because the water comes down. It's not your water, it's sort of thing. And watching the water rise is both exciting and scary. Is that the experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the unknown and the worry about people who didn't want to evacuate their homes. We had quite a lot of elderly people who may have been in a 2-story property and thought that the water wouldn't get as high as the second story. But when the water did get to the second story, they obviously had to be removed for their own safety. But, the non-willingness to leave, I think, I do get it in one instance. It's their home. It's what they know. Potentially they're set in their own ways. As we get older, we all get a bit set in our own ways. But, but for their own safety, I think because it's that slow, like when it's fire, I think people, they rush out.
Yeah.
When it was slow, everyone kind of thought that they'll have time. But at the end, we didn't really have time.
I've seen the images of, tracked of, a single landmark slowly, week by week, getting submerged. It's quite eerie, right?
Yes, yeah. And to think that that the roads were under for such a long time, and some of our roads. So we have a road in Mannum just across the river, and it's one of the main in and out across the river, and that. All of a sudden, just the levee broke, and it just, a full gust of water came through and took it all out. And, there are major roads in and out. So you have to think that people had no swim systems either. So a lot of our septics all run on swim systems. And so there was no septic. So it wasn't safe to be staying in the properties. Sapin came and turned all the power off prior to the flood happening, so there was no power to the properties either. And for those who were wanting to stay, having no water, power and septic isn't a great combination.
No, it sounds terrible. Interestingly, so that area is traditionally, is highly connected to the river. So the river is a part of the social, a part of the economic, a part of the geographical significance of the place. When the river, so how does that change when people who depend on the river, who are attached to it, have grown up multi-generationally around that place, as when the river turns, like in 56 and so on, people, it's a history of the river sort of biting back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for the farmers that was felt the deepest, because they have been through, multiple floods, this being one of the worst for quite some time. But obviously those who farm on the floodplains, have had the in between the 90s floods as well. Then that we've had a lot of drought in between as well, so they've been impacted by that, and then fruit fly as well. So those, I think the farmers are definitely the ones that have felt it the hardest. They've been hit the hardest, and they have some huge areas that they had to move their stock from to get them to higher ground. But I think the resilience of country people was the best thing that I ever saw in this flood. It was, farmers who had higher ground that were, reaching out to their neighbours and saying, hey, put your stock up on my land, to the multiple people that were putting up on Facebook saying, I have a spare block of land. If you'd like to put your caravans or anything you'd like to store up high, please feel free, contact me, stocks and horses and stuff like that. And, I think it's that really community spirit that comes out in these sort of natural disasters that shows how great and how resilient the community can be.
Yeah. It's it's a phenomenon, isn't it? What did you learn about your community?
I did definitely learn that our community is very generous. I learnt that, I think in previous times we would have had so many more volunteers who, CWA and, Lions and all
Lions
of that would have
had
all of those sort of groups. There used to be like hundreds of them, and I think in this time now most people don't have the time to volunteer because they're still working, and we're working later along. And so, normally those sorts of things people would all rally around and help out. And I just didn't think that we had as many volunteers as we normally would, because most of the volunteers from Lions or, those sort of groups were all actually fighting their own flood as well. So, that impacts, especially now, we're still 2 years on. People are still trying to recover from the flood. That takes a massive toll.
Yeah.
A massive toll on people, and a massive toll on groups. I know I spoke to one of the sporting facility group people, and she said to me she was obviously flood affected at her own property as well, and then their sporting group was also flood affected, and that took a massive toll on her, for her to try and manage the two different events. So it has been very, very draining for a lot of people, for sure.
How do you see, because you're supporting directly those people in groups, how do you see them finding a way to keep going? Do they want to quit? Do they want to get away? Is this, or do they put their nose down and just keep going? What are you watching?
Yeah. So we've had quite a different, diverse set of people. We've had, so we have had those groups that just stick their head down and don't want to know about it and haven't even entered back to their properties. So there's some properties that are exactly flood affected, exactly the way they were.
Wow.
And then we've had lots that have just got in and cleaned up and started to try and, recover and repair. And admittedly, they're probably the younger group of people. I think the older group of people, some of them were just like, this is too much for me at this age and I'm done, and have walked away. So I think it's a different, I mean, it's 440 kilometres. There's a hell of a lot of different communities and people involved in that. But individually, I think, a lot of people just didn't want to do it again.
Yeah, like, you can completely understand that. You make the point, like it's 440, and of course, there's the milestones from Renmark to Murray Bridge. It's like it's a very different set. Like they're all connected by this common thread that runs through them, but they actually have very different characteristics and communities attached to those areas. Yeah. How do you deal with that? What does that mean for clean-up efforts and for recovery?
Yeah, I think, there's a stretch between Mannum and Waikerie that is a bit of a black hole for services in general. We don't have a lot of infrastructure in that area, and we don't have a lot of services. So we don't really have mental health services that support anyone in that area. And I did find that area was deeply impacted by the mental health. And then for them to be able to see someone, they would need to either travel to Murray Bridge or Waikerie, which is quite a distance. We're talking about an hour and a half one way to make one appointment. Yeah. That's a huge, as well as a massive financial impact as well, when you think you've lost everything. Yeah. To even access services. And that's why we went out remotely as well. And that's why we were out on the ground, because we took those things with us. I had my car packed to the top with paintbrushes and paints and and suits, so that people could safely start cleaning up the mold and all of that sort of stuff the whole time. So I was forever driving around with a loaded car, but that was what people needed, was me to bring things to them, as opposed to them being able to come out. So I think there was lots of different needs. I think in the Riverland itself, in Berry, Barmera, they have quite a lot of services there. So I think they were quite self-sufficient up in that area. And the same with Murray Bridge. And they obviously weren't as heavily impacted as some of the other areas. But that middle piece, I found that needed a lot more attention.
That's so interesting. What is the consequences from watching? And we don't want to specifically sort of label anyone, but the idea there must be a set of outcomes, impacts on people's lives. What are you seeing is the impact, the negative impacts on people's lives?
Unfortunately, Mid-Murray has one of the highest suicide rates. And that was prior to the flood as well. So I think when the census comes out and we get those figures post-flood, and I think that will happen next year, that we'll see that number has dramatically increased. I have actually spoken to the Governor-General about the black hole and the need for mental health, and I think it's very much on their radar. That area is definitely needing more support and more services.
I've listened to the Governor-General's. She's very switched on.
Yeah, she is.
To mental health and suicide. So that's a good sign. It's an interesting idea about feeling hopeless and feeling overwhelmed and feeling helpless. Right, a natural disaster is that brings people together and community together to focus on the issue.
Yeah.
But is it afterwards? What is some of the risk that's trickling into action in the suicide in the area?
Yeah, so I think the action is that we actually have tried to make champions in the community within their own little community groups, and I think that different little community groups have done a great job of doing that, where they will have a regular get-together, which they might just sit around the fire, which, considering how hot it is today, doesn't sound very exciting, but it's very hot here today. That kind of casual get-together, whether it be a pizza night or a sausage sizzle or those sorts of things, have been invaluable with people getting together and people talking. And so many times people have actually just broke down the barriers and told me their story. So I was about to have an event out at, in that black hole area, and I tried to always use local suppliers and people who were flood affected, so that we try and generate money back in there. And obviously I needed to hire a marquee as it was cold. And I ordered one from a local supplier here. And although I thought he wasn't flood affected, I thought I didn't have any other options. So I thought I'll pay for him. So when he came out, he started telling me about how he knew that I was a wellbeing officer for the floods, but he didn't know what my event was about. And anyway, he was putting up the marquee and talking to me, and he was saying how the floods affected his business, because the majority of people who, so obviously we had COVID, and COVID shut down everything for 2 years, and he lost a lot of business for that. And him and his wife both run this business together, so they were both financially impacted. And then he said, and then the floods happen, and the majority of people that hire from me are all in the flood area. And I hadn't thought about it before. And he said how the financial impact, and he said he had a choice of giving up, or he decided to start walking, and he walks 30 kilometres a day.
Wow.
And that's his, you know, he does it for his mental health, to try and help his mental health.
That's his anchor.
Yeah. And then afterwards he said to me, so what are you having this event for? And I said exactly what you just said. And I said it's about connecting people, and we were actually focusing on men's health and mental health. And he said, oh, well, that's actually fitting that I've just told you my story. And I said, and it's really good that he was flood affected, which I didn't actually realise. And it had never occurred to me that because he had an inner town business and wasn't necessarily on the river, how impacted other businesses were, to the fact that, you know, we had COVID prior to this, and that financially impacted and closed so many jobs and so many businesses. To then have this as well for the next 2 years is, you know, quite a lot for a business to take on.
It's been quite a run for Australians. Record drought, fires, floods, COVID.
I know.
It's been it's amazing. Anyone is still putting out shingle up. So
I know. We here in South Australia, obviously we had COVID, and then we had the Hills fires straight after. So that happened in the January. And then, straight into the floods. So it's really tough here. Yeah, I think the local people definitely were impacted very heavily.
And of course, the area, we talk about, like you talked about how your marquee guy was so involved financially. In many cases, people who are not directly impacted physically by the water are still heavily impacted because of the community connections. And one of the things I've spoken to people about, they feel like they actually have a mental health impact for sort of regret for not suffering as others in their community have suffered. Have you encountered that?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel it's sort of like that guilt, isn't it? That they
survivor guilt.
Survivor guilt, that they weren't as heavily impacted. But we've run a few accidental counselling courses and things like that, so that people can then assist their community as well. And we sort of reframed it that even though you weren't directly impacted, the whole community was impacted in some way. We all know someone who went through it, or it was our community, it was our infrastructure that was affected. And getting some skills behind them and recognising other people's mental health decline, because I think when you know someone really well, from day to day when that person has declined and something's going on, and you're probably the first point of call that can get them some help. So I think that empowered a lot of people to make a difference in their community, which is great.
You talked about, I love the idea about community champions. What do you think that concept brings to supporting on the ground where it's needed the community after such a disastrous situation?
Yeah, well, I think it builds resilience in that community instead of us relying, we can't always rely on, and I think in this area, the council is very heavily relied on for everything because there isn't a lot of other services in the area. But I think building community resilience and having champions gives everyone that go-to person that can then assist them to get other, whether it be contacting someone like me or contacting another service, just gives them that go-to that they can feel they can break down the barriers with. There is only one of me in a huge area, so having lots and lots of champions that get back to me or that kind of thing is, and tells me what's going on in their area and what the needs are, it really does help. It really makes a big difference.
How do you find them?
I don't know. They just pop up. So, when you go into a community, there's always that spokesperson for the community that everyone listens to, and it's kind of like the mini mayors of the little communities and things like that. And they're the people that have got drive, and they're the people that want to make an impact in their community and build resilience, and they totally get it. I mean, I met this beautiful man who was 92, and I was just walking down the road, and he was out in his garden trying to repair it after the floods. And we had a little chat for a little bit, and he asked me what I did for a job, and I told him I was a wellbeing officer, and he rattled off exactly what a wellbeing officer did, and I was like, I'm so impressed that even he knew exactly what a wellbeing officer did. So I was like, that's really cool.
It's interesting because you mentioned some of the the problems people are struggling to volunteer or to offer time back into the community, and some of the organisations that once defined Australia, a small town and rural and regional kind of living, which Rotary, Lions, Apex, CWA, what do you think has happened? Why is modern, because those organisations were quasi, mental health support, they were, community and care, they ran, they, in some ways were, economic balancing groups and, why do you think we've lost some of those?
Look, me personally, I think the majority of people that I have spoken to that want to volunteer, and I know myself, I used to love volunteering, but, when you're doing full-time work, it's very difficult. And I think, that most people now, so the farmers, both the husband and the wives are working very hard on the farm, and then they also quite often have another job as well as they have children they've got at school. It just doesn't leave any time volunteering, and I think it's a financial situation now. Kind of volunteering has become a little bit of a luxury, really, that you can do when you're financially able to, really. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's getting later and later when we can financially do it.
If at all,
if at all, exactly. And whether we physically can do it, because, being out and about on the river and helping people do clean up and all of that sort of stuff is a pretty physical, not only mentally draining, but it's very physically draining.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. What are the things that you're seeing, because, good health in a community, has that kind of physical aspect as well as mental health, as well as social health. What are you seeing communities struggling with 2 years after the flood?
Definitely. Obviously, we have no public transport in our areas. So, so it's that transport getting connection to other areas and all of that sort of thing. And, majority of people are on the lower socioeconomic scale. We're actually on the lowest health scale as well in this area. So I think it's a combination of all of those things together that kind of is a bit of a disastrous zone in itself. That's obviously why the Governor-General, when she came out here to meet me, that we focused on that area as well is because, it is a bit of a concentrated area that has no transport, has no services, and it's quite a large area. There's a couple hundred Ks in between there, so it's quite a lot.
And, the river itself plays a huge part in defining the communities along the river, right? So the big towns and even the small are often tourism and river traffic is intrinsically part of the solution. So how have communities bounced back, to go back to the river? Have they, embraced that?
Yeah, so I think this summer is the first time that I've seen a lot of the shacks and the holiday rentals and things like that be full.
Right.
I don't think last year that we were in any space to have any of that. And I know the government did put out the vouchers for people to come back. But I think, unfortunately, at the time when they put that back, the majority of the towns that I had worked with, we were nowhere near ready to take on any of the public. I think there's quite a lot of caravan parks that haven't actually come back. Mannum in itself, which is my hometown, is where the majority of it is very much tourism based, and we very much rely on our tourist season. So I think in the last couple of years that's really been affected. Obviously prior to that was COVID as well, so that affected things as well. But yeah, I think a lot of those little towns along the river, definitely it's very much tourism based, and yeah, we've unfortunately, yes, they've suffered for those, but hopefully next summer we'll see a really good impact, because the majority of the buildings should be back, and the caravan park should be back, and if everything goes to plan. I mean, we're still having demos happening.
Yeah.
So the demolitions haven't finished. So I think outstanding now is still 15 full demolitions, and I'm unsure of how many part demolitions. So they're still outstanding that haven't been completed yet, and will be completed hopefully this month or the next month. So that's before you can even start rebuilding.
Yeah, my goodness. It clearly is. Even after this time, it's so easy for the world to think about, that was a flood, and now that's over. What else is happening? But
yeah,
you guys are like the Riverland is right in the middle of this still, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. There's so many people that said to me after the water receded that the flood was over. And I was like, with the water receded, but the flood definitely isn't over, because 2 years down the track, we still don't have people back in their homes. Some have been lucky and some didn't have major structural damage to their homes. And, some were the lucky ones who got on the demolition list early. And that may have been by luck, and it may have just been that they could manage to get the services in that they needed to get in to have it happen. So each different person had a different outcome, but, the majority of people that I worked in those remote areas still don't have a home.
It's very difficult to feel good about your own circumstance when your neighbour and friend or even family are still struggling. That must be really challenging for you to deal with it. How do you help these people? What do you do that is... when you're faced with people, you can't tell them that everything's going to be sorted next week. What do you do?
So basically, all I help them do is put a bit of a plan in it, a bit of a timeline, and help them do some soft referrals to different services, so they don't have to keep telling their story again. So I think that's quite difficult to go over and over and over again with your story. It's very traumatic to keep retelling it. So, yeah, definitely those sorts of things, putting in a plan, documenting things, because I think at that time, a lot of people have said to me their brain is like mush. There's so much going on. They're tired. They haven't had a decent sleep. They just have so much stress going on in their lives. And, a lot of marriages had a lot of intense times as well through that time. So, yeah, for me, helping them put a bit of a plan together, helping them collate some of the documentation that needed to be done so that their demolition could happen, or is it their insurance claim, or whatever it is that they needed to do. And some didn't have the capability of doing that sort of thing. Connecting them with food and things like that. And, obviously me being a mental health practitioner as well, this is something that I see on a daily basis. Everyone has their own little story or their own little trauma, and, it's very important for me not to take any of that on, so I definitely make sure I take out time for myself and things like that, and, look after my own well-being, because, we can't help anyone else if we don't look after our own selves.
That's you say that quite lightly, but when every day of your role is connecting with someone that is, holding on, like you're stopping them from drowning, right? It must be a very challenging debrief. How do you, like you say that lightly, but how do you ensure that your vicarious health is good?
Yeah. So, obviously having a debrief and, I have the Department of Premier and Cabinet and Wellbeing SA, and obviously my managers at the council that I could debrief with on a regular basis. And that always helps as well at the end of the day, just to sort of document where I've been. And it's very rewarding as well to be able to assist someone who is at the point of giving up and they don't want to go forward anymore. And then, we can put a bit of a plan in place and we can connect some services and they have some hope. And just, the feedback of saying how that has impacted them and how that's made such a difference in their life. That's so rewarding though. That keeps me going through the tough times.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's an amazing job you're doing.
Thank you.
On that, it just sounds incredible, the work in front of you. What would help you if you had an open checkbook or a bucket with no bottom, right? What would you reach in and pull out?
Definitely. So additional funding for a wellbeing officer, because obviously the wellbeing officer is only funded till the end of this month.
Oh my goodness! Right, yeah, let's get on to that. Yeah.
So that would actually make such a huge difference. And then I would really love to see regular outreach and regular practitioners who go out into the black hole and make a difference, because I'd really like to see a turn in that, in the statistics for the, suicide rate. I'd really like to see a positive impact in that. And I think that psychosocial level is undervalued, I think, sometimes as not being very important. But I think we don't let people escalate to they become, mentally unhealthy, that we, access it straight away and keep that lines of communication open, and less people. Obviously, some people will always still need clinicians, but, we can reduce that number, I think. And that was, if I had an open bucket, I would love to do that.
I think that's brilliant. The recent release of the draft national guidelines on suicide prevention says exactly that, right? That's exactly what they're saying. That psychosocial, social determinants and community response is what we're needing. So I would say, if anyone with policy and funding is listening, we need 24 more Shelleys, right? So running around the Riverland, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, brilliant. So when you give people a bit of a plan, you introduce hope into their world. What changes for them and their community?
I think for them, they can see a clear path to getting out of it. And I think before that, they can't see a clear path. And then also, I think that when they go to the local shop and they purchase something, they spread that love as well, because then they tell that person that, hey, actually, I've got this plan and I'm going this and I'm going to do this and these are the steps I need to take to get out of it. And that is contagious. And people tell the next person and they tell the next person. And, I think that that's how I managed to build rapport in communities that weren't mine as well. is that, I managed to help one person who then had a voice, who then, said she was great, come and see her, blah, 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 and things like that. And then, people said they just didn't know where to start, and they very much needed things written down for them because, it's just when your brain becomes so busy, you just can't think. And then, we had all the basic details written on there that they needed. So if they went to any appointment, they had all of the basics that they needed.
Well, in some ways, we know that, people can't think through threat, the fight, flight, and this is as big a threat as you get. So, that anchoring, that work to calm them down that you're doing is amazing. So what do you see in your the people of your area, of your community now? What have you added as an impression of them?
Well, I think people they underestimate how resilient they are and how they can actually stand on their own 2 feet. And I think, with those plans, I had other people who were starting to teach their other neighbours how to do it, and
beautiful.
Or, copying their plan and saying, well, this plan's going to work for me, it'll probably work for you as well. That kind of thing. And, that builds resilience without, because they're actually looking after themselves. And, the Indigenous community have told me, the elders, that this was they call it the little sister. And apparently we're supposed to be getting a bigger flood in the future.
Oh, wow.
So, I don't advertise that for too much. But, that it's very common for them to tell me that this is something small, and that so hopefully my impact in the community has been that we've built that little bit of resilience should we ever have, and we will have some sort of natural disaster, whether it be another flood, some sort of fire, that they, can use the skills that they have gained and then, manage to help their community get back on their feet.
Yeah, that's wow, and of course that local knowledge that goes back thousands of years, that's, that's hard to ignore, that depth of experience and knowledge, isn't it?
Absolutely, because the majority of the time they're always right. So, yeah. Definitely. And I always keep that in the back of my mind that, I won't be buying a river property. But, the thing is that, they generally are right with that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And, who knows with the weather patterns that we're having at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting that that sort of listening to the local knowledge and to the feedback you get from locals and your experience on the ground. And, of course, the institutions were heavily involved in responding to this. As you said, it was a community, local council and local organisations were heavily responded. So when you bring all that, when you observe what they did right and wrong, what have we learnt? With the prospect of something else happening, what have we learned?
Yeah. So I think so I did do some research on this. I just spent the last year doing a bit of a research program and building resilience in the community, and I think. There was a little bit of delayed communication between the lead organisation out to councils and, other groups as well. And I think that thankfully I know the Riverland Council and the Mid-Murray Council definitely took matters into their own hands and started the process early on. They were preparing for the flood back in the June, July before. As soon as the high waters were reported that we were going to be getting high waters, they definitely jumped into action. And I think that actually has benefited the whole community so much more. Really, it wasn't declared a natural disaster until the November. And that's a bit scary considering we were at peak I think we peaked in the January, the 1st or the 2nd. But, yeah, had they waited, definitely I think that wouldn't have been good. And I think Mid-Murray all of the other counsellors, so we did a bit of research between the counsellors and the community, and the community and the council said that they did a fantastic job of communicating all the information. So they had a bit of a Facebook post that they would update multiple times per day. And they were very, very good. And even the other council areas actually would say that they did a fantastic job of updating with what was happening each day, how much water was coming down, what to do next, all of those sorts of things. And so I think they did do a really good job of that as well. So it's definitely a comment that I hear out in the community all the time, is that the communication was very good, which we don't normally hear that. So
No. And so much can be endured if you know what's going or what's coming,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's what community want most of all, is they want that great communication, and they want to know what's going on so they can make an informed decision about their own situation. And I think that they did a really good job of that.
Fantastic. With you personally, are you and the ongoing job, well, hopefully beyond next month, what do you see as the future?
For me, I would like to see a regional wellbeing position happen, and where we not only just be deployed once we have a disaster, that we're out there building resilience full time. And there's always people that need wellbeing checks. There's always, other things that need doing, and building resilience in the community should be something that we're doing all the time, not just when we have a disaster. It's a bit like learning first aid after the effect, after it. So it's definitely something that I'm very passionate about, and I would love to see it in the future. So fingers crossed that's what happens.
Well, I think that's a wonderful idea. I love the idea, and perhaps attaching a larger truck to the four-wheel drive so you can cart more stuff around, right?
Yeah.
So,
definitely.
Putting that in the position. Thank you, Shelley. Is there, what do you hope that this project can achieve? What would you like us to achieve?
Well, I think highlighting some of the good stories that came out of the flood, even though it was awful, and I think a lot of people don't realise that there's still people out there that aren't in their homes till 2 years later, and I think understanding that this is something that needs to be ongoing as well. Definitely.
Beautiful. Well, we will do our best to back up the amazing work you're doing on the ground to support so many people through such a challenging, almost quiet struggle, right? It's not probably known as well as it should be, just how tough things have gotten and how hard people are working to make a difference. So, it's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you for sharing your story and some insight into the community. I think it's been awesome. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Riverland Recovery Stories. If anything in this conversation has had a triggering effect, please seek support and reach out to someone who can help keep you safe. If you found this conversation interesting or helpful, please share it with your friends, family, and colleagues so we can help more people with their recovery from natural disasters. To find out more about Kintsugi Heroes and our other projects, head to kintsugiheroes.com.au. Thank you to our production team, Kintsugi Heroes volunteers, and most importantly, the Riverland community for sharing their lived experience.